This final chapter, Chapter 6, contains 6 quiz questions to test your understanding of the materials covered in this module. Question 1. Suppose you purchase the regular convertible bond described in Chapter 1, and that 6 months later the risk-free yield curve lies flat at 4.5%, while all other pricing factors are unchanged. Of these two effects, i.e. the decline in risk-free rates and the passage of time, which would have caused an increase in the value of the convertible? Here are the 4 permissible answers. Solution to question 1. This worksheet, question 1 solution, begins with the original data as from Chapter 1 and confirms for the convertible bond in cell E19 here an initial price of 100.55 exactly as before. Now we lower in cell C7 the risk-free rate to 4.5%, and with our eye watching the call option currently worth 847 in H6, we see the call option decline in value, presumably on account of the reduced forward price of the equity as explained earlier, while of course the pure bond should have risen in value simply because rates have dropped. And let's confirm that this was the old price and this is the new price, and indeed it has risen, and risen by a significantly larger amount than the call had dropped, so that the convertible as a whole, which was previously worth 100.55 as you recall, is now risen all the way up to 101.80. Now we reduce the remaining tenor from 5 years also to 4.5, and we watch once again the call option go from 817 in cell H5 further down, presumably due to time decay, whereas the pure bond, which was worth 6 months ago 85.46, has now, because of pull to par, pulled somewhat upward to 86.71, and this effect is again slightly larger than the call option effect, so that the convertible as a whole is now worth 101.93, up from 101.80. Thus the correct answer is A, but technically you really ought to go through this again, confirming that if you assumed first tenor goes from 5 to 4.5 years, and then you let the rates drop by 50 basis points, there would not be a difference in answer. We have done this and we know there would not be a difference, but in other cases there could have been. Very interesting question. Please do confirm this to your own satisfaction. Question 2. Assume market conditions and contractual terms are the same as in Chapter 1, except that ABC common stock now has a dividend yield of 3% and a volatility of 20%, and that a 10-year convertible bond is being priced to have a fair value exactly equal to par. Ignore all imperfections of our pricing model that were described in Chapter 1, including the dilution issue. At which final spot price for ABC common shares would this convertible bond end up having underperformed both straight debt and common stock. Here are the 4 permissible answers. Solution to question 2. This worksheet, question 2 solution part 1, note carefully part 1, begins by pricing the convertible with the 10-year maturity, the adjusted dividend yield of 3%, and the now 20% volatility. And now we use goal seek to cause the convertible to be worth exactly 100, and we're going to change presumably the coupon, allow the coupon to change, and now we hit OK, and we find a coupon in this cell C9 of 5.02%. That's the coupon that, given the other market conditions, makes this bond worth exactly 100, subject to the imperfections of our model. This next worksheet, question 2 solution part 2, which unfortunately we have to shrink beyond what we would have liked, plots, as you can see, the IRR for the convertible as well as that from common stock, column G, straight debt, column H, all against the final stock price in this column F. And then very importantly, it uses a logical formula, an if-then kind of formula in Excel in this column J, to determine when the convertible is the worst performing of the 3 alternatives. Essentially, it's sort of saying compare them all, and if the convertible is the lowest, please write yes, otherwise please write no. We can illustrate this quickly. There you go. If blah blah blah, then please write yes, otherwise please write no. Now the rows which show the 4 final prices mentioned in the question, 40, 50, 60, and 70, have been highlighted in this light yellow color, and they reveal quite straightforwardly that the convertible does underperform the other 2 alternatives, but only in one case, and that is this case here, when the stock is worth $60. The final price is 60. Therefore, the correct answer is C, as in Charles. Question 3. Assume that ABC's senior unsecured credit spread is, under all circumstances, exactly 20% of the common stock's annualized volatility. Otherwise, that all market conditions are the same as in Chapter 1. ABC is contemplating, again, the issuance of a 5-year bond that the holder could convert at maturity into 2 shares of common stock. At what level of common stock volatility would the coupon be lowest? Here are the 4 permissible answers. Solution to question 3. This worksheet, question 3 solution, reproduces our pricing model for a regular convertible, but this time links the credit spread over here in cell C8 to the stock volatility input in cell C12 in accordance with the statement of facts of this question. We proceed now to solve for the coupon at the 4 alternative levels of stock volatility listed in the question: 25%, 40%, 55%, and 70%. We illustrate quickly the example for a vol of 25%. Here we go. Now what makes this convertible worth exactly 100? Changing cell over here, the coupon, and hit OK, and we discover a coupon of 6.37% for this level of vol. The convertible's coupon turns out to be, respectively, 6.37, 6.42, 6.27, and finally 6.01%. So the lowest coupon is achieved when stock vol is 70%, i.e. in accordance with answer D, as in David. We note here, but do not explain in any detail, the interesting pattern of change in the convertible's coupon, which initially rose as we increased vol and then declined. Question 4. Examine the term sheet on the next slide for a type of mandatory convertible and select from below the most accurate deconstruction of the instrument from the perspective of the holder. Here are the 4 permissible answers, and here on the next slide appears now the term sheet. Note already the 5.5% dividend, the 3-year tenor, and finally the conversion clause that has 3 different ranges for the number of shares of the conversion. We emphasize again that you should note in particular the 3 alternatives for the number of shares received by the investor at the conversion date. Solution to question 4. This worksheet labeled question 4 solution plots the IRR for this mandatory convertible instrument in this column G. And as before, to the right of this table, we show the IRR diagram right here. And it should be pretty obvious that the instrument, starting on the left, consists of some long position in shares combined with 2 options, strike 48, and then some other option strike, or number of options strike 60. So as we just said, here on the left, looks like the investor is long common shares and reaps the benefits of any increases up to this 48 here. So for the first $8 of appreciation from spot. At that price, she appears to have sold calls on all her shares, which causes her exposure diagram to flatten completely for the next several dollars of appreciation. She's stuck now at 1146 IRR. But then at the higher level still of 60, with her IRR still more or less stuck at 1146, she appears to have bought some calls once again, which permit her to begin participating again in further common share upside. And as you can see from these little rectangles opening as we move the cursor on top of various points, here for example the software is reminding us that her IRR reaches almost 17% when the stock has done very well indeed. So The correct answer is A, without need for further analysis. But you may have noted that the rate of participation in price gains above 60 over here, this diagonal, is a little less steep. The rate is slower than it was below 48. These two lines are not parallel. The one on the right is less steep, which should therefore confirm that the number of calls she has purchased at this strike of 60 here is fewer than the calls she had sold back here at 48. And that is consistent with the exact wording of answer A, the 25 versus 20 in answer A. More specifically, this structure can be deconstructed as long 25 shares at 40, short calls on 25 shares at a strike of 48, and long calls on 20 shares at a strike of 60. The investor is visibly earning premium on a net basis from these two sets of calls, and this net premium presumably is used to increase the dividend rate prior to conversion from 2% to 5.5%. The instrument is quite similar to our mandatory from Chapter 4, but permits the investor to start sharing in upside once again if the stock does really well prior to conversion. Hence the absence of an absolute IRR cap here in exchange for the lower dividend rate than for the instrument in Chapter 4. Question 5. I buy the convertible bond described in Chapter 1 and classify it in the available for sale category for GAAP purposes. Later, volatility of options on ABC common shares rises and ABC credit spreads widen moderately. Which of these two phenomena will affect my balance sheet while I still own the note? Here are the 4 permissible answers. Solution to question 5. We explained in Chapter 5 that bifurcation is required for a convertible bond, specifically into a pure bond and an equity component. Classification in the available for sale category means that the pure bond component must be recorded on the balance sheet at fair value at all times. This fair value is impacted by the widening of ABC's credit spread, which reduces the fair value of this pure bond component. The embedded equity call option is recorded at fair value on the balance sheet as well, since all derivatives must be so recorded, and its fair value is affected by the increase in volatility. Therefore, the correct answer is A as in apple. Our final question, question 6. The facts are the same as under question 5. Which of these two phenomena below will affect my income statement while I still own the note? And here are again the 4 permissible answers. Solution to question 6. We recall again that bifurcation is required and proceed to analyze now the income statement impact. The pure bond component being classified in AFS, available for sale, means that changes in fair value affect the balance sheet but not the income statement until the instrument is sold, unless the instrument is impaired as a credit matter. The use of the word moderate to qualify the widening of ABC's credit spread is presumably intended to indicate that no credit impairment has occurred as defined in the accounting regulation. This usually requires some more serious deterioration, one that raises serious doubts about the issuer's ability to make scheduled interest and principal payments. Therefore, the income statement is not affected by this factor. The embedded equity call option is presumably not a hedge of any kind for the investor, but rather a so-called speculative position, and therefore changes in its fair value due to the increase in stock volatility must pass through the income statement. Therefore, the correct answer is B as in boy. This completes this chapter, this part 3, and of course the entire module on convertible instruments.